Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about living a life that reflects your values and priorities. Welcome to Engineer Your Success, the podcast that helps you lead with intention and live fulfilled.
I want to welcome you to the Engineer Your Success podcast. My name is Dr. James Bryant, your host and your guide for designing and living a life where you are winning at work and at home. And I hope that you are having a great week. Today, we're going to talk to Sam Stidwell. Sam and I both went to North Carolina A&T, not at the same time, but he is a fellow Aggie. Sam was building the business on the side for roughly a year and a half before it produced his first contract, all while still working a full-time job. Sam was previously with the Army Corps of Engineers. During that stretch, he was also evaluating acquisition targets and exploring more innovative angles like 3D printed infrastructure, just along with those traditional paths. Sam, welcome to the show.
James, first off, thank you for having me on. As you probably can tell to the audience, me and James have been keeping up with each other for a while. And he's actually been a very great mentor for me. So first off, thank you, James. Then getting on to me, I was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Grew up a military brat, and I really loved sports. And so I grew up playing football all the way through college, but I also studied architectural engineering at North Carolina A&T. So there was a passion there for architecture as well. That's pretty much how I grew up. A lot of love in the family. I can't thank them enough for how they always surrounded me with love and support. And from college, once I graduated, I only had one job offer. I did apply and I was close on some others, but the others were taking a little bit too long to pan out. So I ended up accepting this job in Champaign, Illinois with the Army Corps of Engineers. I did have an internship with them before, and that's why I found out, this is a job that I would like to do, because what we were doing was developing large-scale 3D printing technology, and we were training the military how to use that technology for expeditionary construction. Expeditionary construction just means when they're deploying in a place where it's not yet developed, the barracks, the vehicle defense structures, things like that. And so we were training them how to use that as well as developing the technology itself.
So how long were you with the Corps?
I was with them for 5 years, started the job July of 2019, and my last day was in May of 2025.
Okay. And so I want to get to the story of those months before you left the Army Corps and started working on your business full time. But I think it's probably better to start with what you're doing now, and then we can start talking about how you got there.
Yeah. So what I'm doing now is I run a construction material supply company. Now, the unique thing about it is we're primarily focused on public jobs. So it's not like we have a warehouse where customers can just come in and get materials for their residential job. We more so focus on commercial jobs and in the public sector space. We're based in Illinois. Our focus is really Illinois and Missouri right now. I've been doing it for 5 years.
Walk me through what those months look like when you were working on your full-time job and you were building your construction supplier company, kind of in parallel to that, but in the background.
Yeah, so there were different phases. In the beginning, I'm just like, okay, well, let me try this business out. I didn't know it actually worked. I heard it was lucrative. I heard you can land these contracts, but I didn't know how to do it just yet. So obviously I'm working about 9 to 5 for the most part.
Yeah.
So those after work hours, so let's call it 7 to sometimes 2 a.m. in the morning, those were my work hours. And then a lot of times I would use that lunch hour to make a couple phone calls, because you got to catch people during the daytime.
Yeah.
So that was pretty hard because you're researching, you're figuring out what works, what doesn't, and you're trying to develop those relationships. Then,
Okay.
as you mentioned before, fast forward, that was pretty much that's the story. Weekends, after work hours, just working, figuring out what works.
Wow.
Bidding on jobs. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that sounds like a pretty heavy load to be carrying.
Yes, it does. But what I will tell you as well that I think is important is from the point that I graduated, even during my senior year, is really when I started to learn a little bit about business, a little bit about money. And I realized that, yes, I plan to have a good job, but I don't want to solely depend on that for my wealth, my freedom.
Okay.
I always knew I wanted to make a big impact for my family, for my community. And I don't, based on the past and history, it's not good to just rely on a single source of income, like a job.
Okay.
So I knew that.
Why do you say that?
Well, we know that we live in a society based on capitalism. So at any moment, we can be let go. If they need to make that decision to make more money, you can be
Yeah.
let go at any moment. At the same time, looking at the salaries, you're trading your time for money at all times. So I knew there had to be a component of building wealth while you sleep. So that's why I started in real estate. That's where me and James first met. So that was priority. So and saving money to invest, but then also figuring out what can I do outside of work to build some wealth. That's everything that's going on in the background.
No, so that's interesting because I hear you need to have an additional stream of income. You don't want to trade time for money. But when you're on this entrepreneurial journey, a lot of times you end up trading time for money, at least in the beginning, as you're building your business up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even worse in the beginning. Well, I would say it feels worse in the beginning because the gratification can be extremely delayed.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, it took me a year and a half to land the first contract. For that, I had faith now that we were going to land the contract. I didn't know when, doing what I can. So kind of fast forward to right before I landed the first contract, I was frustrated, desperate. I had been working so hard for this all this time, and I hadn't had any gratification just yet. What I did was analyzing how we make sales. I'm like, okay, all these factors go into how we make a sale. And one of the factors that I can control is our price. Let me knock that variable out. So I bid as low as I could with a 1% markup, meaning that's what our gross profit would be. And that's how we ended up winning. That played a big role. I just wanted to win something so bad. I was like, I'm not going to worry about profit as much. Let's just get a win, see how this thing works, and then we'll figure out next steps.
You got your first one, you're feeling great. You're not making any money, not profit wise, but you're feeling great. Then what?
Well, there was actually some things that worked out on that first one where we ended up making more than expected. We were able to supply. At first, we bid on just on the doors, frames, and hardware package. But as the project went through the paperwork and progressed, we were able to supply a little bit more. So profit margin ended up being more like 10% on that job rather than one. That was the first contract that we landed. I was like, wow, I finally did it. This thing actually works. We can land these jobs. That's when it clicked. So from there, I'm thinking, okay, we got the first project. I see how much this can bring in. How do I land another project and another one a month, two a month? How do I develop systems so that we can continue landing projects? And that was a thought process. And it still is. I mean, it's a daily, weekly reassessment.
You won the first one, you were able to configure it so that you can get more than that 1% profit. You're looking at how can you put systems in place so that you can replicate that in the future. This is going on. You still have your full-time job. And then at some point, you started thinking that you were going to transition to doing your building supply company full-time. What was that like for you?
So after we landed that first contract and systems started to develop, let's call it maybe like a year and a half later, I realized how valuable those daytime hours are. So I ended up negotiating a flexible work schedule at my full-time job where I work 9-hour days, so I would get every other Friday off. On those Fridays, that would be heavy networking time. I would be visiting customers. Construction is very old school, so the in-person marketing is absolutely the best, the most effective. So I'm trying to carve out time here and there in the daytime away from my full-time job. Eventually, I even had to start taking off a couple days to make conferences and things like that.
Yeah.
It's getting extremely busy now because we have contracts to manage. Then the next step I did was after I knew we could sustain it, I hired a virtual assistant. So all this is about making the most out of my time. What I loved about building a business while having a full-time job is it put me in the mindset of how do I build this business without solely relying on me.
That's when we reconnected the second time. The first time was through the real estate investing. The second time was maybe a few months after you initially hired the virtual assistant.
Yes. And that was a great time for us to connect. I had the virtual assistant, and to be honest with you, James, you asked about the process up to leaving the job and the thought process of that. My thought in the beginning was to keep the full-time job as long as I could while running the business. I was not in a rush to leave. However, working for the federal government, those came out and started laying folks off.
Yeah.
Left, right. Now, the DOD got a waiver where they didn't have to lay folks off immediately. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really in the first running to be laid off because I had a little bit of tenure. I was there. I wasn't in a probationary period. But doing the research, our funds were starting to run out. So it was getting really rough trying to sustain the teams at Searle where I worked at. Simultaneously, they come out with this DRP, Deferred Resignation Program. They did 3 different offers. The first one was very vague through email. I saw it. They were basically saying, hey, we're eventually going to lay people off. So here's your opportunity to go ahead and leave with severance pay. The first one was so vague. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. I didn't really have contracts to sustain me just yet. So I didn't even really pay attention to it. But after that first one, just, I was talking to God and praying. And to be honest with you, this was the first time I ever felt like I heard God ever in my life. It was like full circle. It was like, I said, if there's another DRP that comes out, I'm going to seriously consider it. But it felt like full circle, like I'm saying it as God is saying it to me. 2 weeks later, another DRP comes out. What do I do here?
You said what you were going to do. What do you mean?
Absolutely. I said what I was going to do. But taking that step is huge. And I'm like trying to make sure the numbers are working out. Ultimately, we end up landing a couple contracts. But here's the thing. There was still a lot of uncertainty with it because it's construction. I didn't quite know when those jobs would finish out to get paid. So there was still uncertainty, but honestly, with the praying, I think I had my decision and I made the leap. So
You took the leap. So you have some turmoil that's going on in the day job. You've been building this business on the side. You've been out there in Champaign, Illinois for probably 3.5, 4 years at this time. But what people don't know is that you also got married around this time. So this decision is not just dealing with you, it's dealing with your wife.
Absolutely. All that is playing into my decision because that is exactly the feeling that I had when I did get married. It went from, just worrying about progressing and building wealth to now I have a unit to take care of. So that was another consideration. But as I said, when I was talking to God, I knew what my decision was. So, and I know He has the best plan.
Yeah.
In Romans 8:28, that's one thing I hold dear. All things work together for those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. So I trusted Him in that. And looking back at the past, it's like, although I wasn't looking to leave the job, it's like, look at all this preparation that's been happening this whole time. It's time to make a move.
The good thing about building your business when you were working full time is that you were able to build it around you, not necessarily to be dependent on you, but you're trying to put systems in place so that you could do both. And I think part of that preparation helped to make it more seamless for you to actually move forward and start. So you've talked about prayer, your conversations with God. What were the conversations with your wife like when you were thinking about making this change?
Honestly, they were pretty smooth. I can't complain because she kind of wanted to know what she wanted assurance, basically. It was just assurance for her. So as long as I gave her that, sometimes that involved sharing some numbers, saying, hey, we landed this contract. Well, if I leave now, I'm good until X month. It was a lot of assurance. She's not much of a numbers person, so I didn't have to get deep into the numbers. I just had to figure out how to assure her emotionally for her to be confident in my decision.
Okay. Obviously it worked.
Yeah, I mean, I, I think God probably had a lot to do with that. He had to talk to her too, 'cause, you know, it's hard for me to.
The reason I wanted to circle back to that is that there may be somebody that's listening, they're thinking about starting something and they have their full-time job, they're working, they're looking to build that pathway or that runway so that they can take off. And absolutely, you want to make sure that you're communicating and praying and talking to God, but you also need to make sure that you're talking to your spouse as well to get them on board, at least to the point where they're comfortable with what that decision is going to be. I know for me, when I was making the transition, Sam, I had a full-time job. I was thinking about what did I want to build? What did I want to do? And I started mentioning it to my wife probably a year before I put my notice in. And we would talk about it to the point that one time we were talking about it and she was like, are we still talking about this? Just go ahead and put in your letter and so that we can move forward. That was her way of saying, hey, I'm confident in what you're talking about and what you're going to do. Let's go ahead and do it. But I will say it would have been hard, but I would not have went out and started the business if I was having conflict with my wife about starting the business.
Absolutely. That would be extremely tough. And I think, yeah, the way you approached it, you had support just like I did.
Yes.
So the support is very important.
Yeah. And for those of you that are listening and you don't have that kind of support, then my advice to you is just like you go to God in prayer about the decision to start the business, go to God in prayer about how you can best communicate or the things that you can do to help your spouse be more comfortable so that you can have that support. I'm not going to tell you to pray for God to change their mind. I will ask you to pray that God will help to change how you think about the situation and how you approach it so that you can communicate in a way that may help to smooth things out towards the goal that you want.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that advice because I look at marriage as like a challenge to become one, and being man and woman, we think so differently. That can be, it is a challenge. It's a guaranteed challenge, in fact. But what you can do together is quite amazing once you start working together and you do form that union.
Yeah, and I would say, my wife and I have been married for 23 years. It'd be 23 years in October. and communicate.
Yes.
Just make sure that you are communicating what your plans are, what your thoughts are, communicate the appreciation that you have for each other. So for me, I'm very sarcastic, right? And so I was always saying sarcastic things. I had to learn to pull back from that sarcasm to make sure that I was speaking encouraging words to my wife. And, so that mean I had to do some changing in how I thought and how I approached the situation. And I can almost guarantee that if I had not made that change earlier on, it would have been very difficult for me to be able to communicate to my wife in a way that I did so that things worked out as well as they have in terms of my transition.
Absolutely. But one thing that you made me think of earlier that's very important in the process of figuring out whether you want to take a leap or not is personal finances.
Yes.
And I'm more conservative. I love financial planning. Some people don't, but regardless, it's very important, especially if you're doing it yourself in your business. One of the important things is going to be definitely making sure you have emergency savings. I know they say 3 to 6 months worth of your bare bone expenses, and you can kind of gauge in there how far you want to go with that. Um, and even with, me and my wife, us discussing our finances together up until that point, and even now, I think that played a big role too. Like we have financial meetings every quarter. And I think that also played into why she was supportive because
Yeah.
we were all kind of on a similar page.
Yeah. Very similar to part of my story, particularly early on in the marriage. My wife and I would have monthly financial meetings, and I was using, I think, Microsoft Money at the time, and they had these cash flow graphs. And so I would put all of the expected income and the expenses, everything in these cash flow graphs, and we would go through those cash flow graphs every month and be like, hey, in a couple of months, it looks like we're going to be in the red. So we may need to make some changes now so that we don't do that. And using a program like that really helped us navigate our cash flow. And it's really no different, honestly, than how you run your business. Because if you don't have the cash flow to meet your obligations, then you're not going to do too well.
I agree. I agree. And that's a big one, especially in construction.
What are some steps that you're taking now to help expand and grow your business?
Number one, I would say networking. Now that I have those daytime hours, I'm doing a lot more networking, and that includes joining organizations that are involved in the industry or industry adjacent. So, like AGC.
So folks that are not familiar with that, that's the Association for General Contractors, AGC.
That's correct. Yep. And mainly what they do there is commercial construction. So these are my customers. So I need to be in the room with my customers, and at the same time we golf. I'm not good at golf. I've embarrassed myself on the golf course, but I can show out when we go to Top Golf and do that type of. But I just need to be there, creating relationships. But then I'm also a member of the Illinois State Black Chamber of Commerce. I've had some great relationships come out of that. For me, I'm always looking to learn more, seeking mentorship from those with more experience than me. And I've been able to meet people that have been running construction companies for 20, 30, 40 years in Illinois within that Chamber of Commerce. So networking is first and foremost. Secondly, I will say is just I actually hired a new virtual assistant and I've trained them on how to do the front end sales. So now what that means is on bid day is usually super busy.
Yeah.
But now because they're pulling in quotes from our suppliers and bidding on the jobs, creating the quotes and invoices, I'm not sitting here locked on my laptop trying to create a quote or invoice all day. Huge improvement. And I would say probably this year, those have been the biggest things. The virtual assistant and then the organizations that I've been a part of creating relationships.
Okay, so in the next 5 to 10 years, where is your business going to be? Tell the folks the name of your company and then where your company is going to be in 5 to 10 years.
The name of the company is The Fourth Distribution. That's the number 4TH. And if you can see my name, I am the fourth. So that is where the name originated. As I mentioned, construction material supply in Illinois, but we do business in Missouri as well. Now, looking 5 years down the road, we touched on business acquisition just a tad bit. It's all about expansion. So it could be that right now, as I mentioned, we're in 3 states. So 5 years down the road, there's potential that we could be in another state. Now I'm from North Carolina, so that may give a hint as to which state we may try and expand to, but little bit by little bit. And I'm so much of a kind of go with the flow. Like what is God telling me to do next? I just want to keep going. I don't really get locked in on a certain vision. I know that I learned how to do business acquisition, and business acquisition, I see that as a solution to increasing profit margin.
So the vision for the company is growth, period.
Absolutely.
That's it. It's growth. You want to be in additional states. If that growth comes organically, if that growth comes from you meeting and networking, if that growth comes from acquisition, you're going to go with the flow, kind of operate how God leads and what the market is dictating, and take advantage of all of those opportunities that come before you.
Absolutely. And you just made me think of one more thing that's been very important is I kind of mentioned it, but the mentorship. Like every single year, I've had some type of consultant, including James, that where I pick up these gems. Like one of the mentors I got early on, I paid for their program, was to learn how to make sales and construction. My background was in architectural engineering. So although I could look at plans and understand what I'm looking at, I didn't know how to make sales and construction. So I sought that knowledge out. And I will say of the mentors, each one I've had to pay for, and it is absolutely worth it. I can see the extreme progress because of those mentors, those consultants like you. And just to brag on you real quick, James, I was looking for businesses to acquire way back in 2024, I believe. And I paid for mentorship and I was so focused. That's one thing about me. I do get like laser focused. And I was getting close on one. And then I was telling James and then Jerome Myers as well about it. And basically they asked me one question. We had a long conversation, but they asked me one question that made me just rethink everything I was doing. They said, okay, you're thinking about investing this amount of money into this business with unknowns. What could your business do with that same amount of investment? Could it grow to the size of that company you're looking at acquiring or larger? When they asked me that immediately, I didn't even have to do any numbers. I knew my answer. I still went and did the numbers, but that question that they asked me made me realize maybe I should slow down and focus on what I have right now instead of trying to acquire a business at this moment. And I feel like that was one of the best decisions I made that year, given the progress of the business now. So once again, thank you for that advice.
I appreciate it. The other thing that I remember from our time working together was just us beginning to focus on the value of the relationships, because most of the business that you were generating were coming through those relationships. And so we would have these discussions of like, okay, you want to do X, Y, or Z, which one is going to help you develop those relationships that you need to develop?
That is one thing that we zoned in on, and I believe that was 2024. Yeah, I'll just say, we have grown about 3x from that time. So once again, mentorship, man, it's amazing.
I love it. And thank you for the shout out here, man. So listen, if people want to get in contact with you or to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I'm pretty active on Instagram. My Instagram handle is tobe_great. That's TOBE_great. I'm also active on LinkedIn. I post every now and again, mainly about business. I love to work out, so if you go to my Instagram, that's mainly what you'll see. I do post some business things up there as well. So those are the two platforms I'm most active on. But yeah, I love meeting new people. So if anyone wants to reach out, please feel free to do so.
And we'll put the links to your LinkedIn and Instagram in the show notes. And so as we look to wrap up this episode, we get to the segment where we flip the mic, where you become the interviewer and I become the interviewee. So Sam, what's one question that you have for me?
James, what I would like to ask you is we've talked about some of the mental things we go through as entrepreneurs. And we discussed, some ebbs and flows in the business. When you have those ebbs and flows, for example, when things don't pan out or you lose a customer, in my case, sometimes we may not get paid when I thought we may get paid a whole year late. When you're looking at that cash flow and you're looking at those numbers and experiencing those ebbs and flows, what keeps you sane in those time periods?
Well, what keeps me sane is my relationship with God. That's number one. So, you know, going to God in prayer and really focusing on my relationship with God, understanding that He has my back and everything's going to be okay. So that's like number one. Number two, just like I would tell any individual, is that to some degree you live below your means. You have a certain amount of money that's coming in. That doesn't mean that you have to spend all of that money in resources. And so during the years when the contracts were plentiful, I was able to store that profit, take that profit and save it. And inevitably you get to points where things don't go as you plan. I had one major client really majorly decrease the amount of work that we were doing on a monthly basis. And at that time, it probably accounted for 70% of my revenue at the time. And so I had to go back and reconstruct, rebuild, go out, build the relationships to be able to build that back up. Then, when there was a time not too long after that, there was another client that came around. We had negotiated, everything was great. The date we're supposed to start the engagement, like the day before we're supposed to start the engagement, he calls and was like, I can't do it. We're running into cash flow issues and I can't make that investment. And so both of those events probably happened within 6 months of each other. And it was a really tough time, but you keep going. You say, okay, am I in this for me? Am I in this for the lives that I'm going to be able to impact? What are you in this for? What's motivating you? And for me, it was more so the lives that I was able to impact. It was creating great content, doing stuff for the podcast, being able to impact the lives of other engineers and other professionals, and really, on my soapbox to help them design and live a life where they can win at work and at home. Because I don't think that it's not always, and I talked about this in the podcast, and I've written about this before. It's not always when we talk about quote unquote work-life balance that something is wrong at home. A lot of times you think, hey, you need more work-life balance. That means that you need to do more at home. I fundamentally approach it from asking those three questions. Do you want to win at work? Do you want to win at home? Are you winning at work and at home? Because sometimes the winning or the focus on the winning needs to happen at work or in your job. But to answer your question, it's mostly I get through those moments by relying on my relationship with God and then being able to store up additional, resources from the years when the profits were plenty.
That's first and foremost. I couldn't agree more, and that's something I needed to hear myself this year. So that's some great advice. And being conservative in your financial planning is very key. Obviously, talking to God, He will definitely keep you. And then once again, like what you just said, you're somebody who has more experience than me. And if I just in my time of mental turmoil, if I go and say, "Hey, James, can I talk to you real quick? Man, I'm going through this." He says something like that, that gives me new energy. So,
Yeah, to let you know, you and anybody that's listening, you're not in this alone. You're not as isolated as you may think. The situation may not be as isolated as you may think. And if other people can make it over the hump, then know that you can make it over the hump as well.
absolutely.
Okay. Well, Sam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been several years in the making. I'm glad that you finally made it. I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you, James. And as always, Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride. Hi, this is James, the coach in your corner. Right now, somewhere out there, there's a person sitting at their kitchen table sometime after the responsibilities of their day job have ended, opening up their laptop for round 2, the side business. Looking at my own story, I remember that as long as I treated the business that I was building as a side business, that's exactly what it would stay as, something on the side. If you want your side business to grow into a main dish, so to speak, you need to treat it as such. We don't save money for the things that are considered a side. We save our money for those things that matter, the main dish. So here are a few things that I did when making the transition from W-2 to entrepreneurship. Number 1, I prayed and asked God for direction. Before I made any plan, I made sure that I wasn't just chasing an ideal, that I was following one that I'd actually sought guidance. Number 1, I prayed and asked God for direction. Before I made any plan, I made sure that I wasn't just chasing any ideal, but that I was following one that I actually sought guidance on from God. Number 2, I protected the people and the money around me. I looked at our personal finances. I made sure that our main bills and concerns were covered. I communicated my plans in detail with my wife until I had her real buy-in. And I talked to our kids so that they would see what their father was building. Number 3, I invested in specific training and a business mastermind to close the gaps that I knew I had. Number 4, I put a deadline on it and submitted my resignation. I'm not telling you to leave your job, but if you want to build something great, it will have to be more than a side dish. I'm Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner, and I want you to be great this week. Thanks.